Okay, so one of the reforms to come out of the Second Great Awakening is the crusade against alcohol or temperance. Alcohol abuse was rampant in 19th century America. Abusers included women, clergymen, and members of Congress. Alcohol had decreased the efficiency of labor while increasing injuries in the workplace. Families were hindered by physical danger to women and children from male members of the family coming home intoxicated. So the American Temperance Society is formed in Boston in 1826, and within a few years, about 100 local groups emerged, and they urged drinkers to give up alcohol and organized children's clubs for children that were affected by alcohol. T.S. Arthur's 10 Nights in a Barroom and What I Saw There, a book published in 1854, described in shocking detail how a secure village was transformed by Sam Slade's Tavern. It became the second bestseller of the 1850s behind Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin and increased the popularity of the temperance movement. There are two major strategies in the early battles against alcohol. There was temperance, which promoted the moderate use of alcohol rather than complete abstention, and then there was this outlaw school, which Neil S. Dow, the father of Prohibition, sponsored a Maine law in 1851 which would prohibit the manufacture and sale of intoxicating liquor. By 1857, 12 states had passed various prohibitory laws for alcohol, yet during the same decade, many of the laws were repealed or declared unconstitutional. Eventually, this temperance movement or this abolitionist or ending of use of alcohol movement would result in a constitutional amendment that outlawed the production, use, and sale of alcohol. The results of the early temperance movement, much less drinking among women than earlier in the century, less per capita consumption of hard liquor overall, and temperance was the least sectional of all of the reform movements. It included abolitionists like Garrison and pro-slavery defenders in the South. So temperance is one of the reform movements that kind of spreads across the entire nation. Women's rights. Sexual differences were increasingly emphasized in the 19th century America as a result of the Industrial Revolution. The burgeoning market separated men and women into sharply distinct economic roles. Women were seen to be physically and emotionally weak, but they were also seen as being artistic and refined. The idea of Republican motherhood thought that women were seen as the keepers of society's conscience, with special responsibility to teach children how to be good and productive citizens. And some women wanted to break away from the role of homemaker and participate in the public world of men. However, there was a prevalent idea in American society that too much learning would injure the brains of women and hurt or ruin their health. So men basically wanted women to stay at home, raise children, and not get involved in politics in any way, shape, or form. Female reformers advocated for women's suffrage and other increased rights for women. They also participated in a general reform movement, temperance and abolition. They were big players in both of those movements. Lucretia Mott, along with Elizabeth Cady Stanton, organized the Seneca Falls Convention. Elizabeth Cady Stanton urged equality for women, rights to sue, rights to own real and personal property. Susan B. Anthony, who was a Quaker and a protege of Stanton, was a militant lecturer for women's rights. The Grimke sisters, Angelina Grimke, was a Southern white fierce speaker against slavery and later in favor of women's rights. And Sarah Grimke was a powerful writer on behalf of the women's rights movement. Lucy Stone helped to organize the first National Women's Rights Convention in 1850. She was an avid abolitionist that had broke with her male counterparts after the war over the dispute of women's suffrage. She retained her maiden name after she was married. Women who would follow her examples became known as the Lucy Stoners. Amelia Bloomer popularized the wearing of short skirts with Turkish trousers or bloomers. which were challenged to be too masculine and to convey immorality. Margaret Fuller edited a transcendentalist journal, The Dial. The Seneca Falls Convention in 1848 was a women's rights convention organized by Stanton and Mott, and at the Seneca Falls Convention in 1848, the Declaration of Sentiments is released, and it mimics in a lot of ways the Declaration of Independence. All men and women are created equal comes out of the Declaration of Sentiments. One resolution that was formally demanded was women's suffrage, or women's rights to vote. The Seneca Falls Convention launched the modern women's rights movement, became the object of scorn and denunciation from the press and the pulpit, the church. It was attended by 61 women and 34 men. The women's movement would be overshadowed by the events of the era. So even though women play a role not only in the women's rights movement, obviously, but in other reform movements of the time period, because of what's happening in the country sectionally with slavery, the women's rights movement is going to be overshadowed and kind of put on the back burner until after the Civil War. Slavery would be the issue that would dominate while Civil War ensued. Yet women gradually were admitted to colleges, earned rights to own property after marriage, and so they're slowly earning their rights, but really what they want is suffrage. They want to be enfranchised. They want to be able to vote. Education, public education, support for free public education gradually was supported by the wealthy. Tax-supported public education triumphed between 1825 and 1850, although it lagged in the South. Laborers increasingly demanded education for their children because they wanted them to be able to get an education and get a better job than they had. Universal manhood suffrage, which came out of the period of Andrew Jackson, allowed for more people to vote, and that freedom of the vote led to a further push for free education. Horace Mann would be one of the major proponents for public education in the country. He argued the key to reform was better education, so that education would better the country as a whole. He established state normal schools to better train teachers. The influence spread to other states, and impressive improvements were made. Secondary education lagged, and 1 million people were still illiterate in the country by 1860. Slaves were forbidden to learn reading or writing. Even free northern blacks were usually excluded from public education. Noah Webster created the first American dictionary, which helped to standardize American English. His readers and grammar books were used by millions of children in the 19th century. They were partly designed to promote patriotism. The McGuffey Readers, created by William H. McGuffey, were grade school readers that were first published in the 1830s, sold about 122 million copies, and the lessons emphasized morality, patriotism, and idealism. Educational development, higher education. The Second Great Awakening led to the creation of many small denominational liberal arts colleges, mostly in the South and the West. Women's schools and secondary education gained some respectability in the 1820s. Oberlin College was open to both men and women in 1837. And then lyceums provided platforms for traveling lecturers in science, literature, and moral philosophy. About 3,000 lyceum lecture associations existed by 1835. So lyceums weren't necessarily part of colleges. During this time period, for entertainment, people would go and listen to others lecture, to others speak. And where that would take place was at these lyceums. The American Peace Society, they agitated for peace and gained momentum in the pre-Civil War years. They were linked with the European Crusade, which made promising progress until the Crimean War in the 1850s and the American Civil War in the 1860s. Dorothea Dix worked to improve the treatment of the mentally handicapped. She traveled some 60,000 miles in 8 years, compiling reports of the squalid conditions from first-hand experiences in poorhouses and basements where the insane were often kept in chains. Her efforts resulted in